So over to you, Dhiramuni and Satyadasa.
Thanks, Savanity, and hello everybody, kia ora tātou. Welcome to what promises to be an extremely interesting and quite unusual session. Last year I had the very enjoyable experience of editing this book, The Sound of One Hand by Satyadasa. We had a great time editing it. It's superbly written, impossibly funny. Books about the Dharma and personal experience shouldn't be that funny, I find, but this one is funny. It's beautifully written. So it's very witty, it's very honest, and it's a very searching book about one man's experiences through life and through the Dharma. And in particular, as you'll have guessed from the cover and the title, coming to grips with being one hand short. So this has influenced his life in interesting ways. Thank you very much. Could you do that again? Okay, thank you. It's been part of his life experience. And as our online blurb Savanity wrote says, is being born with one hand a problem or a gift, which is a really nice double-edged way of approaching it. But much more than that, the book is also an account of how one Buddhist has struggled with all that life has thrown up at him in terms of doubts and obstacles, second thoughts, and attempts to combine a Buddhist life with the other part of life and trying to find a way through that. And this is living, you might say this is living Dharma. This isn't Dharma theory from a textbook or from a sutta. This is real life experience, which this one man has led. So welcome. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So shall we start, Satyadasa, at the beginning, as it were? Describe growing up in London, in South London, with one hand, how you handled it and how it progressed.
Thank you very much, Dhiramuni, and thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to be here. It was really great to have you giving your input, your editing input on the book, and it meant a lot to me, certainly, that you were very encouraging and that you engaged with it, and at that point that was really important for me. So thank you very much for all your help. And yeah, really good to be here this morning or evening. It's evening. I'll try and get into the evening thing. Okay, so yeah, well, I grew up in South London, just south of London. And as you say, that part of the book is sort of diving into something very personal, very immediate in my life. It wasn't the first thing I thought about writing about when I started to write. I thought I had this urge to communicate, and I sort of, as you do, I started to think about Buddhism and how to communicate Dharma and all those kind of things. But it quickly, I realized if I'm going to communicate, I'm going to have to really go into something much more down to earth, which is this fact that I was born with a disability. My parents who were fairly, it was very difficult to have a baby. Of course, you always count the toes and the fingers, don't you, when a baby is born. They found that very a struggle, but their attitude was helpful one. It was, you're normal, you're normal, things are fine. We'll make adaptations to things that need adapting. We'll just persevere. So lots of, my dad swapped the brake cables around on my bike when that time came. My mum cut the fingers off my gloves and sewed the holes over, did all those things, and cutlery and everything, and in a way that was quite straightforward. So the idea was that I was normal and that I could get on just as well as anybody else, which I think was a very helpful, good way forward. And I guess I felt as I grew up, I felt more at a deficit in terms of, I needed to be really good in order to make up for some difficulty, although this was never explicit in my mind. It was never that I thought oh, I've got one hand, so therefore I need to do better. But I just needed, I felt I needed to succeed, as we all do when we're children. We want to succeed in various ways. But there was a compensatory element to this. I needed to be as good as everyone else. And to do that, I really needed to sort of beat them at their own game, do things faster, quicker, and be more successful. And I did have that experience. I suppose when you're 8, is often an age when one comes into more consciousness of one's identity. And I remember that's the time when other children also started to bully me on the basis of my disability, and just that feeling, this is a heavy weight. It was like, this is a thing that I cannot get rid of it. It's just going to be there forever. I do remember that one particular day, just realizing in the school playground, this was not going to go away, however much I wanted it to. It was a thing. And of course, when you're 8, that just seems like an endless, you can't think about the future very far when you're 8, can you? It just seems like it's always going to be that. So it was, but yeah, so the origins.
Okay, we'll come to the stump in a minute, but first, it's very clear to me reading the book that your grandfather had enormous influence on you, and he was a very unusual grandfather, wasn't he? And there's also a personal connection with the Tree Retina Order, which is rather unusual.
That's right, yeah. So my grandfather was born just after the First World War, or just at the end of the First World War, and he started to, as many people did, I think, after the Second World War, they were pretty sick of wars, and there was a sense of universalism. There was a move towards kind of the idea of universal government and universalism in the kind of religious opening, spiritual opening. So he became involved in a lot of those circles, which I think, Sangarekshta mentions as well, the Madame Blavatsky and early pioneers of what you might call sort of Eastern religion in the West. He got very involved in that. And and I didn't know this. I didn't really know this. And I mean, I grew up he had this huge collection of Eastern philosophy, and he was a very controlling sort of man, and would force feed my mother and my uncle Buddhism and Taoism and all kinds of other isms. He didn't really, my mum found him a very, very difficult man to grow up under. And she didn't like Buddhism much as a result when I started to get interested in it. But and I didn't know this, but in the 1960s, he took a few trips to the Buddhist Society, which is in London, which was one of the key institutions of Buddhism at that time. And he must have met Sangarekshta at some point. I'm not sure, but it resulted in an invitation to come to their house in 1965. This was when Bhante had just come back from India. I think it was his first trip back from India. So he came along and met my mother, who was then 17, and my uncle and my grandma, and gave a talk on Atman in their little discussion group. And my grandfather had set up a kind of a Hindu to give him strong opposition to that doctrine, and at the Atman doctrine or whatever of the Hindu. So they had a good old argument. They had a good old ding dong in my grandmother's house, which is where I kind of grew up partially. I mean, they still had that house when I was growing up, which was really amazing. And I recount it in the book, but my grandmother could only remember Bhante's teeth. That was all she could remember, because they were horrific. He'd just come back from India and he had kind of really yellow, gappy teeth.
She called them funny, didn't she? She called
funny
them funny.
teeth.
Yeah.
Oh, he had funny teeth. That was all she could remember. My uncle's more philosophical, so he told me more about it.
Right. You believe, do you not, that link through your grandfather with Bhante is actually of some substance? Could you speak a bit about that?
Yeah,
from your point of view, your point of view growing.
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather was searching for something. He was a seeker. I think that's the word they used, seeker. It was he wasn't interested in mundane things. He was very dismissive of society and all kinds of other things, really. But he was a seeker, and I was kind of my parents would say, well, you're a bit like grandpa. He was asking questions, always seeking, you always. But then there's the more mysterious aspect of, is there a link? Is there a link? Why was I born in that family? I was born in a family where there was a picture of the London Buddhist Centre in the bedroom where my mum used to sleep. I mean, in the cupboards, some of the old Tree Ratner or FWBO newsletters of the opening of the London Buddhist Centre. And I found these out after I was a mitra. I sort of dug around in the attic and found them out. But I don't know, but the more I dwelt on it, the more I'm open to the point of view that we're born where we're born. Why are we born in particular families? What do we have to learn? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but certainly I feel kinship with my grandfather's quest. And he was born at a time when there wasn't really a Sangha. There wasn't really a kind of a good way of leading, really having a more kind of grounded, real spiritual life. It was very bookish in those days. It used to drive Sangharakshita, he recounts, it drove him crazy going around these groups. They're so intellectual.
And just coming to the stump, in the book, you initially downplay it to a degree. You write, I smudged the whole problem in my mind by believing it wasn't a big deal. And when you came to deliver your first life story in a Buddhist group, you spent precisely 30 seconds on the stump and moved on to more important things.
Yeah.
So what was going on right into adulthood? You were setting it aside really as a serious subject and essentially trying to ignore it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's so obvious to other people, isn't it, that you've got this disability. That's one of the things about a visible disability, is you can't really hide it. I used to try to hide it and just tuck it behind my back, or just make it subtly out of the frame. And yeah, what was going right into adulthood? You're right. I wanted to minimize the subject. I mean, it was, I suppose, I was on the train even just the other day, and I had my hand on the table there. I was just doing something, and there was a little boy sitting opposite. He must have been about 7, and he's looking at it, and I noticed that he was noticing it, and I felt that urge to take it away and just get it out of sight. And I was interrogating, why, after all this time, am I worried about a boy or anybody seeing my stump? I mean, what's going on there? And I think it's something to do with the fact that, I don't know what's going on in other people's minds, but I don't want their main impression of me to be that I have a stump. I don't want my main impression of myself to be that either. And of course, for many people, it won't be the main impression, but it's a kind of a strong thing, isn't it? When you see someone, I feel this, when I see someone with a disability, you're drawn to look at it, or you're drawn to sort of think about it, or it's natural. There's nothing sinister about it. It's just straightforward. It's something that's different. And I think in my mind, I wanted to minimize or downplay that aspect of being a bit different in some way, because I wanted people to, wanted people to love me because I'm so brilliant in other ways or something, So, I want the Dharma. I love the Dharma, right? I love the truth. I'm drawn, I don't want to be dragged back down to some little detail. But of course, it's not a little detail. I mean, that's what I sort of explore in the book a bit. Yeah.
You do. Yes, you do. So how did your personal narrative, if you like, about it change? After in your first life story saying, this is probably only worth about 30 seconds, to really more serious consideration.
I saw a man on the tube once. I was just traveling to work, and there was a guy who was a sort of banker somewhere in the city of London, and he came on and he had a similar thing. And I realized I didn't want to speak to him. I've been practicing Dharma there for about 9 years. I was about 30 years old, and I was training as a lawyer myself at this time. And I didn't I didn't want to sort of acknowledge the common thing that we had between us. So I just sort of, hoped he got off quite quickly. But it sparked an interest. I'm interested in my mind, but am I really interested in what's going on? And I felt slightly, I don't know, ashamed or a bit, upset about myself there. So I went on a course. I went and I met some other people. I deliberately sought out some other people with a similar thing. And so I went on a wonderful week with some children. I was an adult helper. All the adult helpers and all the children, we all had one hand. Some of them didn't have any hands, but most just had one hand or half an arm or something. And that was really helpful, because there's nothing like meeting others who have the same sort of situation as you in that respect. Of course, we're all different in other respects, but there was some real common bond, and I felt very awkward. I remember going into a pub with some of the volunteers, the adult volunteers, and just seeing all these weird little stumps and digits and strange arms, and thinking, I want to get away here. It's something made me very uncomfortable. I think that's kind of, we probably all have that. That sort of, there's a pinch point where we made to feel a bit uncomfortable and suffer somewhat in any path of growth and maturing. And I just and also because I was mentioning it a little bit more to friends, and I was allowing them to say something back. I think I built a bit of a silence around it, which doesn't invite other people to say, oh, how does that affect you? And and then in a way, when you're speaking to someone with a disability, you have to be quite brave to broach the subject with it, because it's a fraught. It can be fraught with kind of little worries. It never bothered me if anybody mentioned it. I just, but people generally didn't. But then, some friends would have a little bit of a discussion about it, and I just more and more thought, oh, I've got to look into this. And then I started writing, and writing the book actually then started to make me think more. But it's a narrative. I think you use the word narrative, and part of the book I wanted to talk about the narrative of that and how that changed, and in a way how all narratives change. And narratives are never clear. They're kind of like, it's a useful narrative to think, I want to be normal, I want to be just like everybody else. And then it's a useful narrative sometimes to think, no, this is a big thing, this really affected my life, this was a point of suffering, this was possibly even what drew me onto the Buddhist path. That's another narrative. Which one is actually true is another question, like ultimately true. I don't think either of them are ultimately true. I don't know what's ultimately true. But to bring in other stories and kind of show that there's many ways we can see our lives. That's one of the precious things I find about life stories and reflecting on your life, which is a practice we do a lot in Sri Ratna.
One of those narratives really interests me, and that Maitreya Bandhu reckons that perhaps having this stump has given you an extra dollop of difficulty to bring out the good stuff. And you report your preceptor saying that your hand gave you just enough suffering to push you into the spiritual path. Now, I think you probably agree with that, do you?
I think so, yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, I tried to be successful and fit in like we all do in many ways, or many of us do. I went to Oxford. I studied law, but there was an unhappiness. It was harder to communicate with other people in some ways, particularly around relationships and my thoughts about whether I'd be attractive or not attractive, or how to manage all of that. And hands are so significant in terms of the way that you reach out to the world, you communicate with gestures and touch. They're so significant. It was a thing right there that that was really affecting my mind, and I wasn't really aware of it. I couldn't really bring that fully into consciousness that was a problem, because I so much didn't want it to be. but it must have been there in the mix of things that led me to say, I want to go on a meditation retreat, after a friend went on one. And but there were other forces that led me to go on a meditation retreat, namely my grandfather and other things. But that was a big factor that it stopped me just simply going on and being a lawyer. And I said I went into the Buddhist Sangha and into communities when I was 22.
Could you describe that that incident, not the incident? Could you describe that that thing that happened to you on the retreat during your meditation, when you really felt for the first time that you had lit a fire or kindled a flame? It's a very moving experience that you describe. Could you describe that?
Yeah. I was. I had an experience. It's very common, isn't it, on your first retreats or your first few retreats to have sort of big opening up moments when the meditation clicks. I wasn't. I think one of the things about that retreat was that I wasn't expecting. I'd been going to the London Buddhist Centre for a little while and starting to engage with that. I think it was a vision of Sangha, actually, ultimately speaking. I mean, I could talk about my meditation experience and dhyana and all these things, and that was wonderful. But it's all a bit funny to talk about what meditation experiences. But it was a vision of something that was, it was like, I think about it as changing my whole sense of what the universe is, sense of what life is, subtly. I mean, it doesn't happen in one go, does it? While I came along, I started to get amazed by some of the things Sangharakshita was saying, some of the people at the center, and reading books, and kind of a wonder opening up, a sense of, these people are living life, from the ground up. They're not like the academics I saw at Oxford who I couldn't see the point of all the discussion about philosophy, and I just couldn't see the point of it. But coming to the Buddhist Center, there was a vision that was being presented, which was slowly opening up my imagination. And once this meditation experience came into that, it really took the lid off and opened up a sense of, well, maybe there's more to life. Maybe there is more to this whole life than the stories that my good, and I'm sure it's similar in New Zealand, good society in many ways troubled, but reasonable. They give you a sense of what life is, careers, and how to be happy. But suddenly something was opened up, which was more, much vaster, much more incredible. And I think that's, for me, that's what I was given. I was given that by the Sangha, by people, not just Sangharakshita, but the other teachers, other order members all together. And that, in a way, when I was writing this book, I really wanted to honor that opening of the vision, opening of the Dharma. We call it the Dharma, the imagination, and say that for me, that was the most significant thing that's happened in my life, and that was a turning point. There's all the detail and how that works out, but to really just say that, to sort of, and I wrote the book in order to clothe that, because that's what happens to so many of us, isn't it? That's that thing that happens. I've seen it happen again and again to so many people. That fundamental shift in perspective. It's not all worked out. We don't know what it all means in one go or where it's all going, but there's an opening of the heart to something much more. And that is what's hard to communicate to say to other people. Some people have been saying, I want to give this book to my mum or my friend, because it kind of helped. We're always trying to communicate to the other people in our lives, aren't we, about what we're doing, but it either sounds a bit sort of highfalutin or abstract or holier than thou or something. It can often feel wrong when we try to communicate. So what I wanted to do was to really, in the whole book, in a way, to trying to get onto that central. I'll stop there. What's your?
It's a very good answer.
Yeah.
One of the strongest features of the book for me is the honest the direct honesty that you express about your doubts and struggles. And we all have doubts and struggles on the Dharma path, but you seem to have had more than your share. And at one stage, you decide you don't want to live in a community. You do want to live with your girlfriend. You're questioning your whole commitment. You leave the community. You actually review. You revise your request for ordination. And for some years, I think. Oh, that's right. And you shunned your preceptors. And for some years, you pulled right back, and you were focusing on things other than your progress on the path. So these were dark times, I think, but I think we're all interested in, because we all have our struggles as well and our doubts. I think the way in which you approached this was particularly interesting. So what changed? What changed for you, and how did that affect you?
Yeah, so there's a movement, isn't there, that often people have. You get involved in the Triratna or some Buddhist organization, and things really open up, and you really feel it. So you kind of think, oh, I know this. This is. I'm not doing this because it's Buddhist or because I've really had this experience. So you feel really inspired. And then I wanted to get involved. I lived in a community. I worked in one of our team-based livelihoods. I went in, full on. Then, after a few years, or a couple of years, other things started to surface. It was like I hadn't I guess I had an idea that maybe I would just move on in this way. You're getting more and more positive, doing the more and more metabhavana, more and more this, more and more that, and more friendship, and all the great ways that we lay out the path in Triratna. There was that, but then there was other part of me that just didn't want to be. I didn't want to be in this community. Rather, I felt sort of horrified by the vision of becoming older, going on lots of retreats, giving up romance. This was my notion of it anyway. Like I couldn't. I was living with people who were in their 40s, maybe, or late 30s, 40s, or 50s, and they were. Like I felt like I hadn't done it. I think this is a problem, or not a problem. This is for some people, for younger people who get involved in Dharma practice. You have particularly. I mean, it's the same for all of us, but you have lots of. I had lots of conditions in my life. I wanted to make use of. Well, I had an expectation that I would be successful. I would be earning money, and these things didn't evaporate as soon as I had this vision. They didn't just sort of go away. They were just sitting there as a sort of uncomfortable feeling that I hadn't really lived my life yet, and now was getting involved in this Buddhist thing, and it sometimes felt like I'd given up my personal life or something. I'd sort of, I was now moving into another way of being that didn't include having more sex, having getting more, earning more money, being more conventionally successful and things. So I think that was what I started to doubt. It's self-doubt, then it was self-doubt, then I was doubting maybe these teachings are not right, maybe all these people around me are, just kidding themselves. And then we do pujas and things, which I found it quite difficult to relate to anyway. Although I did relate to them. It's interesting, the puja would be a good example of doubt, like on the one hand, we were a bunch of guys in the community sitting around a fairly average looking shrine, chanting these things in fairly not too beautiful fashion, but I could really respond to that puja, and there's really something in it, really had an effect on me. And yet I didn't want to. I felt very uncomfortable with where that was going. It was just so kind of, what do I have to commit my life to that? So that vision, what about all these other things? So that made me fairly miserable, actually. And I've seen this quite a lot. You get involved in Dharma practice, and after a few years, you're less happy than you were when you started, or it's not as clear anyway.
You make that very, very clear. And in fact,
Yeah.
that after a couple of years in the men's community, you were far grumpier and more negative than you had been when you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, and people start pointing out things about you. You get a little bit gentle bits of feedback, maybe stronger bits of feedback. Because I was working with other Buddhists, I was living with them, and I'd asked to be ordained. So they were sort of saying, "Hey, do you know when you're cutting and you make sort of sarcastic comments, this has an effect on people?" And that would make me, I'd take it very personally, like it was a very big kind of a really massive criticism or something. And so those things, and I think I had a sense of, oh, I can't do this, so eventually the painful thing then was to leave, and to kind of, I had to, and people, a lot of the order members were very, not encouraging me to leave, but very sensible in their approach, was to say, like, you don't have to do this, you can go and earn a living, that's okay. But I would interpret it in my mind as them saying, actually, do you know what? You're a bit of a failure at this whole spiritual thing. Why don't you go off and lead a nice sort of, nice life? You can, but so it was, there was a strong identification. I think this is something that a lot of people have to, one identifies with a kind of a set of conditions as where one gets one's spiritual life, and that identification can end up being a source of pain. And we have to identify with particular places and love what we do, and kind of get involved with real, actual Sangha, real people, real community. But then for me, there was an identification with that, which was ultimately unhelpful. It was like I could only have my spiritual life at the London Buddhist Centre in this community, which was obviously nonsense. But leaving that and kind of in a way going away from friends and really lovely, amazing people, what an amazing vision, what amazing conditions, but it wasn't right, so I had to go.
I was very impressed actually at how the senior people, if you like, at the centre and at Windhorse responded to what you had to say. The man at Windhorse said, "Oh, okay, you don't want to work here, that's fine. Go and work somewhere else." And
yes,
the men at the LBC were happy for you to leave. Because they were able to show you how there wasn't an alternative. There was another way of leading your life. So
that's right.
So what, after some time doing that, getting a better quality shirts and trousers, and
yes,
being able to afford more good stuff,
yes.
When did things change, and how did they change? And what if there's a lesson there? What do you think that is?
I don't think in my heart of hearts I ever really left. It was, I didn't. I mean, I kept on going to other Buddhist centres around the country. I moved to another part of England with my girlfriend, and we started going to another Buddhist centre there, Triratna Buddhist centre. So I didn't exactly leave, I think, but one of my things about my doubt is that I doubted so much that I sort of doubted my doubt as well. My doubt was so thoroughgoing that I ended up bringing the doubt into question. And my preceptor, Ratnagosha, he always used to say, be bigger, not better. Be bigger, not better. No, just embrace more of all of the things that you are. And he gave me a lot of confidence that that's okay. All these different strands, all these different things that I wanted to live out in my life, conflicting aims, views, and things. I just open up to it all. Just open up to it all. And it was parallel what was going on in our wider movement. There was a kind of lot of pain at that time. A lot of people feeling different things about Bhante and the past and things. So it was just kind of, let's put it all out there. Let's just put it all on the table. And you don't have, I think the one turning point was I didn't have to resolve all of that. I didn't have to. I had that young man's urgency to resolve all the questions, but I don't have to resolve them all.
I think that's the key, isn't
yes.
it? That's a great point, that you didn't have to resolve it.
Yes.
You could continue along the path, but you didn't have to live at the centre. You didn't have to work at Windhorse.
I think it's about trusting. I think like trusting the life path that I was on. Like I was on a life path already. I am on a path. I don't how. I don't know how I got involved in Tree Ratner, really. It just sort of happened. I don't know, but I don't know whether Tree Ratner is the best Buddhist organization for me. I don't know whether there's something else I should be doing, but I really am on a life path, and it was sort of saying, okay, just have confidence that this is okay. I think sometimes when I've thought about my life, and maybe other people have the experiences where you think maybe I'm not living the right kind of life. It's a bit unsatisfactory, isn't it? It's a bit humdrum. It's a bit neither here nor there a lot of the time, but actually big things have happened in my life in terms of, as I was saying before, about this opening of this possibility of transformation, possibility of having a bigger view of the cosmos and the meaning, and linking my life to this bigger life, and our life to this bigger life that is indicated by all this bodhisattva ideal and things. So, that's amazing, and that's enough, and that's just go with that. And then I I can be ordained, I can be ordained into this. I don't care whether it's perfect or imperfect, Tree Ratner, really. There's neither, it's irrelevant. I'm on this path, and I'll get ordained, and we'll see where that takes things.
I think that's absolutely the critical center point of it all, isn't it? That your mentors decided to pack you off to Spain. Let's ordain them, and it'll settle down in another way. So I suppose the lesson is steadying and settling and accepting, and not forcing stuff, perhaps.
Yeah. What is it? I don't quite know how to express that at this particular moment. I think but that would be right. Not forcing things through, and not necessarily resolving. One order member, many order members said things to me that weren't wise, and I stuck some of the wiser ones in the book. But the one guy said, oh, you don't, you just keep some questions on the back burner, like on the back stove. You don't need to kind of resolve all the questions and come to conclusions about things. That's kind of over-identifying with, that's taking refuge in an idea about the Sangha, or how this thing should be, or how my life should be. I feel very fortunate in a way. I've been had some great friends, I couldn't have done it without friends and without my wife, all those things.
Okay. You talked about just before about some of the other issues were prevalent in the movement, or developing in the movement, and you at one stage talk about Tree Ratner's midlife crisis.
Yes.
And without going into a massive, well, no, you can go into as much detail as you like, but how were you responding to this midlife crisis, and what do you think are the most important points?
I've had to live, I went on my first retreat that I mentioned was when the Guardian article emerged in 1997. That was about 2 months after my first retreat. So I'm kind of a child of the Guardian article. I've been with that whole debate the whole of my time in Tree Ratner now, 25 years, and I've seen it unfold in various ways. And as a very general point, I think the way that I see it is, if you're going to do something and you're going to love something, you have to stay with the love, stay with the loyalty, stay with that, and things, the doubts are going to come along, and you're going to feel like you're getting knocked off, you're out of your center. And some of the things that happened, I'm not going into the rights or wrongs of it all, of course, but some of the publicity and the difficulties definitely affected me, and they definitely knocked me off my center. And that's natural, that things are gonna, if you set out on a path and you value something, that things are going to come along that are going to upset that. But one of the things, I was a young man, so I remember seeing, certainly around the sort of turn of the century, say 2003 to 2010, there was a lot of order members who were a bit older than me, who were really finding that, you know, they were having doubts when I started, and there was less of a sense of doubt. You know, it was very clear. There was a clear narrative about our history and what we were doing. But then through those early years of the last 25 years, there's been a lot of people wondering, well, was this, what did I do with my life? Did I not have children? And, you know, there was a lot of pain around the idea of maybe group pressure caused people not to do certain things that they might have wanted to have done. This was certainly not the truth for everybody, but there was an element of that, reappraising some of the teachings. Did they really work? What does work mean? What does it mean that this meditation practice, is it any good? Is the whole thing set out by Sangharakshita? Does it really go where it was thought to be going? And there was a lot of doubts about that. And I call it a kind of midlife crisis of, you know, the order turned 40 in 2008, and it was a completely natural thing that people getting a bit older. But I watched it from a generation below. I didn't, you know, and I had my own doubts, of course, as I've expressed, but yeah.
So are you saying that from that generation below, as it were, these weren't things that were worrying you or affecting you in the same way as, say, the older people?
I think they were. I think when you get, I mean, when I was about 30, I still had the idea that I could make what I would of my life. I could ultimately, you know, I had time. I could, you know, I had possibilities ahead of me. I wasn't going to make such a hash of my life, you know, as these older people seem to be doing. You know, like that's in a way the naivety, isn't it? That you think that, you know, you're not going to make the same mistakes as your elders and things. But of course, when I've got into my 40s and stuff, I've well been able to relate to notions like regret, a sense of, well, life isn't all ahead of me now. It's kind of like a lot of it's past, and all your hopes and dreams didn't really turn out exactly like you thought they would, or maybe not at all, or maybe differently. And, you know, getting into that, I can see how that's just an ordinary thing, whether you're a Buddhist or not, doesn't make any difference. That's an ordinary facet of life when you get a bit older, that there's a certain amount of disappointment to be born. And so when I was looking at it, I didn't have that. I thought, oh, I'll be okay. I won't get into the same mess that these men and women have got into. But I was still doubting. There's still a lot of doubt, yeah, about things.
Admirably positive.
Yes.
We have some time for questions, which is okay with you, Satyadasa?
Sure. Yeah. Great.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of time for questions. If you have any, if you could unmute yourself.
They won't be able to, so I'm just going to invite people to put their hand up, which is
Okay.
reactions. I mean, in the Zoom sense of the raise hand, which is if you click your reactions button, there's a raise hand option, and we'll come to you and I'll invite you to unmute. I might also, shall I stop recording at this point so that people can just be, oh no, Vikampia just voted that down quite strongly. I can edit it out later if needs be. You guys just get in touch with me. Reticent bunch tonight. So,
Satyadasa, it's been so interesting hearing you talk about the content of your book. I was just wondering briefly what your life is like today as a Buddhist. You've been with Triratna for 25 years. You've been through your period of doubt. You've watched the doubts of some of the older members, and then you've come full circle again. So how would you describe your Buddhist life today, right now?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, on the personal level, last year, my wife and I decided to adopt a little boy. So this year we have adopted a little boy, and my life is pretty much engaged with that full time. But I'm a trustee at the London Buddhist Centre, and I guess, how would I say that? So it's a tremendous like opportunity. Like being an order member now for 10 years, 11 years. I just realized it's pretty much what I want to make of it. It's nothing set about it. I see it as an opportunity to keep honoring, in a sense, that thing that I was initially given, and try to pass that on in some way, to try to pass it on. And I see our emphasis in Triratna on friendship and personal communication as being so important. And then, and I try to do that around the London Buddhist Centre, and to see myself as part of this lineage that we're trying to pass on. It's precious, it's very imperfect. We're in a phase, aren't we, where we're trying to work out what we are still. We're always trying to do that. In the 60s, it was very clear, seemed to be a revolutionary sort of thing, a new consciousness coming into being. In the 90s, when I came along, we were in the era of just after the fall of the Berlin Wall and various other global events, was more optimism about the future and progressive politics and things. But now, where are we now? What's happening in the world now is very much different again, and I find it all very confusing when I think about the world today. But what I hope to do is to stay sort of true and kind of clear in my mind and my heart about the preciousness of the gift of the Dharma. I don't know where it's all going to go. I don't know what it is really. So it's faith. I think that's the kind of thing, and I'm trying to kind of cultivate that sense of openness to something greater than my little occupations and minds and thoughts. And so when I do if I ever get to the meditation store, which is kind of, I usually meditate just after reading a bedtime story now, but to sort of to just Tara is the yidam that I practice, and to invest Tara with as much of that as I can, that unknown sense. Sometimes I think she's just a guardian angel. Sometimes she's just an inchoate feeling that life is more. And sometimes I can find my imagination opens into that. And sometimes I just find myself saying, oh, I don't know what any of this is. But yeah, so that's my kind of inner practice and my outer practice a little bit. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Satyadasa. There's a question from Wendy.
Oh, thank you. I wondered about the doubts that you had, Satyadasa, in that period when you were talking about other people around their 40s having a midlife crisis, so to speak. What were your doubts at that time?
Yeah. There was a guy who came along to the Buddhist Center, and so who was not part of Triratna. He wrote a book called The Record of Awakening, a guy called David Smith, and he came to the London Buddhist Center, and he gave a talk, which was I remember a very senior order member introduced him as being a very advanced practitioner. And this is very strange, because nobody ever introduces any of us or Triratna order members as being very advanced. Suddenly there's a very advanced guy in the room. And what he said was tremendously clear, and we can hear some wonderful, clear presentations of Dharma from other teachers. I particularly, my wife is involved in the Thai Forest Sangha. And I've had some wonderful talks from Ajahn Sumedho and other forest renunciants, and I'm sure we've all had that. We hear wonderful Dharma teachings from elsewhere. that in some ways can be, you know, more pertinent at certain points than the teachings that we might have heard from Triratna or wherever. So like there was that whole conundrum, that whole sort of conundrum of all of that. Well, what does that mean? Is that going to allow, does that mean that I have to sort of go somewhere else? Does that have to, what is that all about? And yet in my heart, I felt like, you know, this is the Sangha that I'm involved in. The last thing I remember my trip Andy saying, maybe you need to go and join the Thai Forest Sangha. And I'm like, well, I don't want to join another Sangha. I mean, one Sangha's bad enough. Come on, you know. I like the complications of two Sanghas. Give me a break. So like, but like, you know, my heart was in the Sangha here. So there was all of that. I mean, that's just one aspect of it. But a lot of it was just some simple self-doubt. Was that think, oh, I can't change. I can't really change. There's people telling me, you know, you need to kind of be more aware and integrate, and they seem to be able to do it. They seem to be really spiritual. And then I'd go, no, they're not really spiritual. They're just kidding themselves too. And then, you know, but like, probably it was more the underlying it all was more the personal feeling of, oh, I'm always going to be like I am, you know, I'm always going to be me. So that was the main source of doubt.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's very
Wendy.
helpful.
We have time for another question. And if there isn't one,
I might throw one into the mix as a follow-up.
please do.
Which is that, going back to that sense of self-doubt, you know, like these other people can change, but I can't. What was it that turned that around? Because that's a conundrum. Sometimes there's some really sticky ideas we have about ourselves, isn't there, that seem so hard to shift or impossible to even approach.
Yeah, they don't seem to go away, do they? In some ways, they don't seem to go away. Maybe there isn't, part of it is accepting that, you know, some things are just going to keep coming round. And again, Ratnagoshi used to say that I need, you know, just needed to soften into things a bit. There's a kind of a process of softening. And I don't want to put myself forward as somebody who's resolved all of this. But what I have is a confidence that over a longer period of time we can change, and but we're not trying to like become perfect. I don't no longer think of myself as trying to become ethically perfect, trying to do the meditation practices in anything like the way that I formerly conceived of them. But then there's some other element that comes in, which is to do with the wonderful possibilities that, possibilities is wrong. It's a more of a direct feeling for this greater life that even is beyond this life, beyond life, and you know, my little life. And there's something that's so, you know, it doesn't resolve all these questions of how to live this life, what to do, and all the habitual patterns and self-views that keep recurring. But there is a point of freedom in it. There's a point of freedom, and to feel that creative, you know. But Sangharakshita Bhante, he spoke so much about the creative life, living the creative life, and staying on that thread, just feeling that thread. There's a lovely William Stafford poem says there's a thread that called The Thread, where you just say, you know, there's a thread, you have to follow it. Yeah. Just keep hold of the thread. No one else is going to understand what you mean when you're talking about this thread. You know, wars happen, people get old, sick, die, but you just don't let go of the thread. And I think that's it. I think what I found inspiring about being part of a Buddhist Sangha is that there are people who are living their Buddhist practice all the way through to their death, you know, and kind of having a sense that life you can continue in the path right through your life. And I've always found that very, very inspiring, and particularly the encounter with death. So, you know, it's a much bigger picture that emerges, and that bigger picture that emerges through practice and that can slowly become more real, and you get a more of a sense of it. That's the most precious thing. Whether we resolve all our kind of habits, all our karmic patterns or not, I don't think is a big thing.
Thank you.
Satyadasa, thank you so much for the last hour.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your clarity and your bravery somehow. You're in there staunch. And thank you for that idea that we don't have to be perfect, that the path, being on the path and being serious about it and committed is really what it's all about. So thank you very much. Thanks
you.
everybody for coming. Now you can buy the book. Savanadi was holding it up. There it is. There are copies at the Auckland Buddhist Centre for those of us in Auckland. And for those of us who aren't, you can buy an ebook through Kindle, through Amazon. You can also buy the hard copy through Amazon and the book depository and in the usual way. So thank you.
I just popped a link in the chat window to Satyadasa's website where I believe you can order a copy. To be honest, the cheapest way to get hold of a copy is to buy it from the centre or directly from Satyadasa.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely, and I feel a bit closer to Auckland now, and I hope one day I'll get there in person.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
You can unmute now if you want to.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dhiramuni.
Yes, I think he's gone.
I think he's gone off to work actually.
Oh, look at all these people. Hello. Moving on to Coco, are we?
Shy. All right,
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
All right, love you are.
See you guys. Oh.